Michael Jordan witnesses a referee humiliate a teen player, then walks onto the court. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The gym was packed, the air thick with anticipation. It wasn't just another game, it was the National Youth Basketball Tournament, and scouts from all over the country had gathered to witness the future of the sport. Among the players on the court was a young teen, eager to prove himself in front of an audience that could change his life. The pressure was palpable. It was a high-stakes moment, not just for the players, but for everyone involved. The game was intense, fast-paced, and everything this young player had trained for, all coming to a head in this one critical match. As the game went on, the teen struggled. His nerves got the better of him, and mistakes began to pile up. He missed easy shots, lost the ball on a crucial possession, and his confidence started to slip. He looked to the bench, hoping for encouragement, but when his coach called him out of the game, the humiliation was immediate. His teammates didn't seem to notice, absorbed in their own game, but the teenager felt the sting. It wasn't just that he was benched, it was how the referee had treated him. The way the official had yelled at him for the smallest mistake, belittling him in front of everyone. The words cut deeper than the mistakes he had made on the court. He wanted to stand tall, to show everyone he wasn't just some kid who couldn't handle the pressure, but the shame was overwhelming. On the sidelines, Michael Jordan watched from the stands. He wasn't there as a coach or a mentor, he was simply there to witness the game. Still, even as a spectator, Jordan couldn't help but feel a deep connection to what was unfolding. He'd been there, on those courts, with that same weight on his shoulders. He knew the feeling of being judged, of wanting to prove himself to the world. The injustice of what the teen was experiencing stirred something in Jordan. He recognized that raw potential in the young player, but it was clouded by the environment around him, an environment that seemed to punish failure rather than nurture growth. When the referee continued to humiliate the teen, Jordan's resolve hardened. He couldn't just sit there and watch. His competitive nature, the part of him that had driven him to be the best in the world, couldn't allow someone else to experience what he had seen too many times himself, the crushing weight of being judged too harshly. Jordan stood up, walked toward the court, and without saying a word, stepped onto the hardwood. He didn't need to speak to make his point clear. The game paused, the attention immediately shifted to him. The referee, momentarily confused, stopped in his tracks. Jordan, looking calm yet resolute, walked straight toward the official and placed a hand on his shoulder. The atmosphere shifted, the players, the coaches, the spectators all held their breath. It was a moment of surreal calm amidst the tension. Jordan's mere presence seemed to command attention. His eyes locked onto the referee's, and without raising his voice, he simply said, "That's enough." The official stood still, his face flushed with confusion. It wasn't just that Michael Jordan had walked onto the court, it was that Jordan had seen something deeper. He saw a young player, perhaps with a future that mirrored his own, being crushed under the weight of a moment. The referee looked hesitant for a second, but the power of Jordan's presence couldn't be ignored. The gym grew silent as Jordan turned to the teen, giving him a nod of encouragement. "You've got this," he said quietly. Jordan didn't need to say anything more. His actions spoke volumes. The young player, initially stunned, slowly nodded back, his shoulders lifting slightly. The referee, realizing the gravity of the situation and perhaps understanding the unspoken message, turned and walked off the court. The game resumed, but the energy had shifted. The players moved with more intensity, the mood lightened. The young teen, once timid and unsure, now moved with confidence. He wasn't just playing for the game anymore, he was playing for something bigger. As the final buzzer rang, Jordan watched as the team pulled off a narrow victory. The teen had redeemed himself in front of an audience that would remember his performance long after the game ended. But what stuck with Jordan wasn't just the win, it was the change in the young player's demeanor. He had been given a chance to grow, to make up for his earlier mistakes. Jordan had seen that same potential in himself at a young age, a potential that only came to life when someone took the time to see past the mistakes and give him a moment of grace. As the gym emptied, Jordan lingered for a moment, watching the players and coaches congratulate each other. The young teen, his confidence visibly restored, caught Jordan's eye. Their gazes met, and the young player's face broke into a smile. Jordan gave him a knowing nod. It wasn't about the game, it was about giving someone the chance to be more than they were in that moment, to see them for what they could become, not just for what they had done wrong. When Jordan left the gym that day, he didn't do so as a former basketball player or a legend. He left as someone who had witnessed a turning point in a young life, a moment when grace and mentorship had turned a simple basketball game into something far more meaningful. For Jordan, this was just another reminder of the impact he could have, not just as a player, but as someone who understood the deeper meaning of leadership and the importance of giving people a chance to rise, even when the world seemed to judge them too harshly. Jordan had always been known for his competitive nature, his drive to win at all costs. But this moment reminded him that there was more to the game than just winning. It was about recognizing potential in others, encouraging them to keep going even when they didn't believe in themselves, and giving them the tools to succeed. It was a lesson he had learned on the court, and now, as a spectator, he realized he could still make an impact. This wasn't the last time Jordan would see young players rise to the occasion, nor was it the last time he would intervene when someone needed help. But this particular moment stayed with him, a reminder that the game wasn't just about the scores and the championships, it was about the people, the moments that shaped them, and the influence that one person could have in a young player's life. As the years passed, that day would become another chapter in Jordan's legacy, one that added depth to his character beyond the basketball court. He had shown that his greatness wasn't just in his ability to make history, it was in his ability to change the course of someone's future, one small moment at a time. The teenager that day would remember Jordan's intervention, the quiet words of encouragement, and the grace he was shown when it seemed like everything was stacked against him. And perhaps, in years to come, that young player would pass the same kindness along, knowing the power of a moment when someone truly believed in him. The event had sparked something in Michael Jordan, but it wasn't just the act of stepping onto the court to stop the referee's harsh treatment of the young player. It was something deeper. It was the realization of his power, not just as a basketball player, but as a mentor, a guide, and someone who could use his influence to shift the trajectory of someone's life. Jordan's role in the sport of basketball had always been clear. He was the greatest player to ever play the game. But in that moment, he realized that his impact extended beyond championships, accolades, and the thrill of victory. It was about changing lives. Back in the locker room after the game, Jordan reflected on what had just transpired. He knew the power of the spotlight, how every move he made was scrutinized, and how his every action could be a lesson to others. But this wasn't about showing off his power, it was about helping someone understand their worth, even when the world made them feel small. Jordan had grown up in a small town, where the odds seemed stacked against him from the start. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be underestimated. That feeling stayed with him throughout his career, fueling his drive to prove everyone wrong. It was part of what made him so relentless on the court. But now, as he looked back at the teenager he had just encouraged, he saw a version of himself. A kid just trying to find his place in a world that sometimes seemed unforgiving. The teen's talent had been clear, but it was the way he had been treated, the way the referee had stripped him of his confidence, that had left a mark. Jordan's mind drifted to his own early days in the NBA. He thought back to the struggles he had faced in those first years, the doubters who questioned his ability to lead, the losses that felt like they might define his career, and the pain of not yet being able to bring the team to the heights he knew they could reach. There were moments when he had been benched, moments when people questioned if he could handle the pressure. But he had found ways to rise above it, to ignore the noise and focus on becoming better. That's what he wanted to give the kid, the same perspective, the same ability to push past mistakes, to learn, and to grow. As the days went by, the incident at the youth tournament stayed on Jordan's mind. He couldn't shake the thought of the referee yelling at the young player, the crowd's mixed reactions, and how one person's cruelty could define a young athlete's sense of self-worth. It reminded him of a time in his own life when he had been rejected, not just by others, but by his own internal doubts. And it was in those moments of rejection and challenge, where he had learned who he truly was. He had learned that greatness didn't come from avoiding failure, it came from bouncing back from it, stronger each time. It wasn't long before Jordan found himself back in a similar situation. During a practice session at the Chicago Bulls training facility, he noticed a young player, no older than 19 or 20, struggling with his shooting technique. The kid was clearly talented, but his nerves were getting the best of him. He missed shot after shot, and with each miss, the frustration began to build on his face. The young player was a part of the Bulls' summer camp for promising prospects, trying to prove his worth in front of coaches and scouts. But as Jordan watched him, he saw that it wasn't just the shooting technique that needed work, it was the mental game. Jordan, ever the perfectionist, approached the player quietly, not making a spectacle of it. He asked him to take a seat on the bench for a moment, and the player, visibly embarrassed, sat down without a word. "Listen, I get it," Jordan began. "You're frustrated because you're not hitting the shots. You want to prove yourself. But here's the thing, this game doesn't care about your mistakes. It only cares about how you respond to them. The best players in the world don't always make every shot. They make the next one." The young player nodded, and Jordan could tell that the words had an immediate impact. He wasn't just talking about basketball, he was talking about life. The same principles that had made Jordan a success, his relentless focus, his ability to push past failures, were the lessons he was imparting. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about striving for greatness, no matter how many setbacks came along the way. As the session continued, Jordan watched the young player's confidence start to return. His shots were still off, but his demeanor had changed. He wasn't overwhelmed by the pressure anymore. Instead, he focused on the process, not the result. The kid started making shots. Not all of them, but enough to show that he was capable of rising above his doubts. And that was enough. Jordan could see the shift. The kid wasn't just learning how to shoot. He was learning how to be resilient. Later that day, after practice, Jordan sat alone in the locker room. He thought back to the tournament, to the kid he had stepped in for. He had done something that, for him, felt natural, but it was a moment that the young player would carry with him for the rest of his life. Jordan knew that this kind of intervention wasn't just about fixing a mistake or protecting a player's ego, it was about shaping a future. Just like with the young player in practice, Jordan had given the teen at the tournament something more than just a lesson in basketball. He had shown him how to stand tall, how to respond to adversity, and most importantly, how to believe in himself. As Jordan left the gym that evening, he thought about the way the game had shaped him. He had been pushed to the limits, both mentally and physically, throughout his career. But every challenge had taught him something. And now, as an older man with a wealth of experience, he realized that the real victory wasn't just the championships, the trophies, or the accolades. The true victory was in knowing that his impact had reached beyond his teammates and fans. It had stretched out to anyone who needed guidance, anyone who could learn from his journey. That night, Jordan made a mental note. This was a role he was growing into. He wasn't just a basketball player, he was becoming a mentor. His time on the court, the intense battles, the pressure of championships, had given him something deeper. It had given him the ability to inspire. He could teach young players about basketball, yes, but the real lessons were about life. They were about resilience, about overcoming setbacks, and about understanding that the game wasn't just about winning, it was about what you did with each opportunity, each moment, each failure, and each success. The next day, as Jordan arrived at the facility, he sought out the young player again. This time, he didn't offer advice on technique. He offered something more powerful, his trust. "Keep working hard," Jordan said with a smile, "but more importantly, don't be afraid to fail. The best things in life come from the moments you least expect." The young player looked at Jordan with newfound respect. It was clear that the impact of those few words would last far longer than any basketball lesson he could have learned. And as Jordan walked away, he knew that in helping others rise above their challenges, he was solidifying his own legacy, not just as a player, but as a guide for the next generation. The story of Michael Jordan was never just about the basketball court, it was about how he navigated the challenges, internal and external, that came with being the greatest. As the years passed since his retirement, Jordan found himself more focused on the legacy he left behind and the new generation of players who looked up to him. He had always been a relentless competitor, but now he saw his role as one of guidance and mentorship, helping others navigate their own journey toward greatness. It was no surprise that Jordan, even after stepping away from the game, continued to attract young talent, both to his foundation and his personal endeavors. The 90s were a transformative decade for basketball, and Jordan was its undisputed face. However, his story, filled with legendary moments, was still influencing the way young athletes thought about their approach to success. Yet Jordan knew that his influence could go beyond the court. He recognized that many young players struggled to manage the pressures of life, not just the game itself. They lacked the mentorship that could guide them not only through basketball but through life. That understanding led Jordan to become a more vocal advocate for helping younger athletes understand the broader scope of their potential. One particular moment brought this feeling to the forefront, a youth basketball clinic in Chicago that Jordan had agreed to host. It was an event for local players who were looking for guidance and insight from one of the greatest players the game had ever seen. The clinic was packed with eager faces, young players, coaches, and parents, all of them hoping to catch a glimpse of greatness, to be touched by the same magic that had helped Jordan carve out his legendary career. At the clinic, Jordan wasn't just there to talk about shooting technique or dribbling drills. Instead, he emphasized what made a great player: hard work, perseverance, and, most importantly, character. He spoke to the group not as a basketball icon but as someone who understood the struggles of trying to rise to the top, to stand out from the crowd, and to deal with setbacks along the way. He spoke from experience, about the challenges he had faced growing up, how rejection and failure had shaped him, and how they had ultimately fueled his desire to achieve greatness. As Jordan spoke, a particular young man caught his attention, a teenager who stood at the back of the crowd, seemingly disinterested in the motivational speech. Jordan had an eye for talent, and though this kid wasn't standing out with flashy moves, there was something about him that intrigued Jordan. The teenager was more reserved than the others, not showing the same eagerness, yet Jordan noticed how his eyes lingered on the court, observing everything. He wasn't just there to play. He was there to learn. The kid, no older than 16, hadn't made a significant impression in the drills earlier, and Jordan knew that. But Jordan also knew that greatness didn't always manifest in the first impression. Sometimes, it was about the long game, about pushing through the invisible battles that most people never saw. Jordan saw something else too, a fire beneath the surface, one that wasn't so easy to detect, but one that could ignite at the right moment. Later that day, during a scrimmage, the teenager was put into the game. He was a bit hesitant at first, unsure of his place among the other more experienced players. But Jordan watched him closely. The kid's first couple of plays were a mess. He missed passes, fumbled the ball, and struggled to make an impact. The coaching staff, too, was ready to pull him off the court. They chalked it up to nerves. But Jordan, from the sidelines, saw more than just the mistakes. He saw the kid's eyes. They weren't filled with self-doubt. They were filled with the desire to fix it, to do better. That was enough. Jordan called a timeout. As he walked to the center of the court, the gym went quiet. The coaching staff looked at him, puzzled by his decision. But Jordan wasn't concerned about making the perfect decision. He wasn't focused on the outcome of the scrimmage. He was focused on the kid who had shown potential in a way no one else could see. Jordan turned to the teenager, who was standing near the bench, looking down at the floor. "Get back in there," Jordan said simply, his voice steady. The teenager looked up, surprised, and Jordan could see the moment of uncertainty in his eyes. Jordan could almost hear the inner dialogue that was running through his mind. What if I mess up again? Jordan could almost hear him asking himself. "I'm watching you," Jordan continued, "and I know you can do this. But it's not about making every play. It's about the next one. Keep your head in the game, and focus on making the next one count. You've got this." The kid nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling in. There was no magic fix, no sudden transformation, but there was belief. And that belief, coming from someone who had faced down every obstacle imaginable, was powerful. Jordan knew that sometimes that was all a player needed, to know that someone saw their potential, even when they didn't see it themselves. The scrimmage resumed, and the teenager stepped back onto the court. This time, he moved differently. His posture was more confident, his movements sharper. He didn't suddenly become the star of the game, but he started making the right decisions. He didn't let a missed shot or an errant pass shake him. Each moment was an opportunity to learn, to improve, and he took it. By the end of the session, his performance wasn't extraordinary, but it was clear that he had grown in those few minutes. The coaches were impressed with his resilience and newfound confidence. Jordan watched the scene unfold from the sidelines, a small smile on his face. He had seen this before, both in himself and in others. The road to greatness wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, about the ability to bounce back, to continue fighting even when things weren't going well. And in that moment, Jordan knew that this was the lesson he wanted to pass on more than anything else. It wasn't about mastering every move or getting every shot right. It was about continuing to put in the work, to rise after every setback, and to keep showing up, no matter what. After the session ended, the teenager approached Jordan, his demeanor noticeably different. There was no longer hesitation in his movements. Instead, he stood a little taller, with a more determined expression. He walked over to Jordan, who was packing up his things, and said, "Thanks for letting me stay in." Jordan didn't respond right away. He simply looked the kid in the eye and nodded. "You earned it. Just keep showing up. The game's not just played on the court. It's played in your head. You've got the right attitude. You're on the right path." The teenager smiled, his eyes lighting up with a mix of gratitude and renewed purpose. It was a small exchange, but it was one that would resonate for a long time. Jordan's words weren't meant to be a guarantee of success. They weren't meant to imply that the kid was destined for greatness. But they were a promise that with the right mindset, the right effort, and the right belief, anything was possible. As Jordan left the gym that day, he knew that his role in the game had evolved. He wasn't just a player on the court anymore, competing for titles and accolades. He was now the one teaching, guiding, and mentoring. It wasn't a role he had asked for, but it was one he had grown into, one he embraced with the same passion and dedication that had made him a champion. This wasn't just about winning. It was about passing the torch to the next generation. The youth clinic had ended, and as the young players began to filter out of the gym, Jordan sat quietly in the corner, reflecting on what had transpired. The look on the teenager's face when he walked off the court after the session had stuck with him. The way the young player's shoulders had straightened, the newfound confidence in his step, it reminded Jordan of his early days, when everything had felt like an uphill battle. He'd seen that same uncertainty in himself before, the same hunger for validation that drove him to push beyond what was expected. And just like that, in the span of an afternoon, he had given the kid something far more valuable than any basketball lesson could provide. But the experience wasn't just a one-time occurrence for Jordan. He wasn't just someone who passed through these moments of mentoring without thinking about them. It had become clear to him over the years that his purpose in basketball, what truly motivated him, had grown far beyond the championships and records. The game had given him a platform to reach people, to connect, and to leave behind something lasting. Jordan was a legend, but he had also become a symbol of perseverance and relentless determination. Now, he understood that it was his responsibility to pass on those lessons. The next day, Jordan arrived at the gym early. He wasn't just here for the next youth clinic. There was something else pulling him back into the game. A deeper responsibility. He had spent years learning from the best and making the best better. Now it was time to do the same for the next generation, especially the ones who had been overlooked or who had yet to understand their true potential. That morning, Jordan had received a call from a coach at a local high school in Chicago, a coach whose team had been struggling. They had a talented but erratic player, someone with raw potential but whose confidence was constantly shaken by the smallest setbacks. The player had talent, no doubt, but needed something more. The coach had asked Jordan to come in and talk to him, to offer some of the guidance that had helped Jordan become who he was. Jordan agreed, his thoughts already racing through what he might say. This kid wasn't unlike the teen he had seen at the youth clinic, full of potential but lacking direction. When Jordan arrived at the school, the gym was empty except for a few players shooting around. He recognized the young man immediately, the tall, lanky player who had been spending most of his time on the sideline, not fully involved. The kid was taking shots, but he wasn't confident in his form. He was going through the motions, making half-hearted attempts, as if trying to convince himself that he was good enough. Jordan walked over to him. The kid stopped shooting and turned, his eyes widening when he saw Jordan standing there. "You're Michael Jordan," the kid said, a mix of awe and disbelief in his voice. Jordan smiled, but there was something deeper in his gaze. "I am. But today, I'm just someone who wants to help you get better." He paused for a moment, studying the player's body language. "Tell me something. Why are you here? Really?" The teenager hesitated, looking away for a moment as if trying to find the right words. "I want to be great," he said quietly. "But I don't know if I can be. I've been told I've got potential, but I just mess up too much. I keep failing." Jordan nodded slowly, remembering his own early struggles. "You know, I wasn't always the player you think I am," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I had my own doubts. I missed more shots than I care to remember. But what I learned, what helped me, was this: greatness doesn't come from avoiding failure. It comes from how you respond when you fail." The young player looked at him, uncertainty still evident in his eyes. "But what if I don't get better? What if I never make it?" Jordan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "That's a question you need to ask yourself, but you've got to ask it from a place of belief. Because when you believe in yourself, no failure will be enough to stop you from reaching your goals. If you're playing scared of failing, you're already lost. But if you're playing with the confidence that every failure is just a lesson, you'll find your way." Jordan's words hit the kid harder than he expected. He had heard coaches and teammates talk about failure before, but hearing it from Jordan, someone who had built his entire legacy on overcoming failure, felt different. There was a weight to Jordan's words, a sincerity in his voice that gave the message power. "You think I made every shot?" Jordan asked, stepping back slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Think I didn't miss? Think I didn't get cut from my high school team? I did. A lot. But that didn't define me. It's what I did after those moments that made me who I am." The teenager's expression softened, the weight of Jordan's message beginning to sink in. He picked up the basketball again, this time with more purpose. Jordan motioned for him to take a shot. The teenager dribbled a couple of times and shot, this time, with much more control and confidence. He missed, but Jordan wasn't concerned. He nodded, encouraging him to try again. The kid took another shot, and then another, each one a little more accurate, a little more confident. Jordan smiled, watching closely. "Now, that's what it's about. Failing is part of the process, but you've got to be committed to getting better. Every day. Every shot." As the session went on, Jordan continued to guide him through drills, focusing less on mechanics and more on mentality. He taught the kid how to shake off mistakes, how to focus on the present moment, and how to find joy in the process rather than obsessing over the outcome. Jordan wasn't just helping him improve as a player, he was helping him improve as a person, showing him how to carry the lessons learned on the court into every other aspect of life. By the time the session ended, the teenager was noticeably more at ease. His confidence had returned, not because he had suddenly become a great shooter, but because he had learned to embrace the process of improvement. He understood now that failure wasn't something to be afraid of, it was something to learn from, something that could fuel his desire to get better. Before he left the gym, Jordan took the teenager aside once more. "Remember," he said, "greatness isn't just about talent. It's about work, heart, and how you bounce back from those tough moments. Keep your head up, and keep pushing." The teenager nodded, a new fire in his eyes. "Thanks, Mr. Jordan," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Jordan nodded, clapping him on the back as he walked out of the gym. The impact of that session would stay with the kid for a long time. It wasn't just the skills he'd learned or the techniques he'd practiced. It was the message, how to persevere, how to keep going, how to rise above the doubts. For Jordan, moments like these were where the true essence of his legacy lived. It wasn't in the championships or the MVPs. It was in the impact he had on others. The players he helped, the lives he touched, and the lessons he imparted, these were the things that would outlast the accolades, the trophies, and the records. He had learned that true greatness wasn't just about being the best on the court, it was about helping others become the best version of themselves. And as he walked out of the gym that day, Jordan knew that his work was far from done. The following week, Jordan was back in Chicago. His mind was still lingering on the young player he'd met at the clinic. The kid had made an impression, not just because of his raw talent, but because of the quiet desperation Jordan had seen in his eyes. That same hunger for approval, for validation, Jordan had felt it before. It reminded him of his early days in the league, when he had struggled to find his way, not only as a player but also as a man trying to live up to expectations. In the years since, Jordan had learned how to deal with those pressures. He discovered that success didn't come from proving something to others, it came from proving something to himself. Every championship, every MVP award, every accolade, was the result of a relentless commitment to becoming the best. But Jordan also knew that not everyone could see the process, not everyone could feel that fire that pushed him to succeed. As the days passed, Jordan reflected on the countless young players he had met over the years. Some of them, like that teenager, were still searching for their place in the game. They had talent, but they lacked the mental fortitude to keep going when the world tried to knock them down. In many ways, Jordan had become a symbol of that perseverance. He had faced rejection, failure, and defeat at every stage of his career, but it was his ability to rise from those moments that had set him apart from the rest. One afternoon, Jordan was sitting in his office at the Charlotte Hornets headquarters. He had recently purchased the team, and he was beginning to step into a new role as an owner. The transition from player to businessman had been an adjustment, but Jordan was always up for a challenge. Still, he knew that the success of the Hornets wouldn't just come from his financial backing. It would come from his ability to instill the same principles of leadership and resilience that had defined his playing career. His phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was the coach of a local high school team, asking if Jordan would come and speak to the team. The team had been struggling, and the coach thought that Jordan's presence could help reignite the players' drive. Jordan didn't hesitate. He knew that this was his opportunity to make an even bigger impact, not just as a player, but as a mentor who could teach the next generation how to overcome adversity, how to stay focused on their goals, and how to rise above the noise. The gym was buzzing with excitement when Jordan walked in. The team was gathered, their eyes wide with awe as Jordan made his way to the center of the court. For these kids, seeing Michael Jordan in person was an experience that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. But Jordan wasn't there to bask in his own legacy. He was there to help them write their own stories. "Look," he began, his voice steady and firm, "I know you're all here because you want to be great. But greatness doesn't come from showing up once in a while and expecting things to fall into place. It comes from being committed every single day. From showing up when you don't want to, from pushing yourself even when you feel like you've hit a wall." The players listened intently, some of them nodding as they absorbed Jordan's words. They had heard similar speeches before, but there was something different about hearing it from someone who had lived it. Jordan wasn't just talking about basketball, he was talking about life. He was talking about resilience, about facing down obstacles and refusing to let them define you. "You've got to love the grind," Jordan continued. "It's not just about winning the game, it's about the work you put in every day, even when no one's watching. When you're working on your game, when you're pushing yourself in the gym, that's where the real progress happens." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Jordan could see the doubt in their eyes, the uncertainty of whether they were really capable of achieving what he was saying. But Jordan knew that doubt was natural. He had experienced it countless times. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't was how they responded to that doubt. "You're going to fail," he said, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. "That's a guarantee. But failure is not the end. It's the beginning. It's where you learn, where you get stronger. I failed more times than I care to remember. But I didn't quit. I didn't give up. I learned from those failures, and that's why I'm standing here today." Jordan's words were met with silence, the players taking them in, each one processing the message in their own way. For some, this would be the spark they needed to turn things around. For others, it might take a little longer. But Jordan wasn't worried about the immediate impact. He knew that the seeds he planted would grow in their own time. As he left the gym later that day, Jordan couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He had given the players something they needed more than anything, a sense of purpose, a reminder that success wasn't about talent alone. It was about the work, the drive, and the belief that you could always improve, no matter how many times you fell short. Back at the Hornets' offices, Jordan found himself thinking about the broader picture. His role with the team wasn't just about drafting the right players or making the right business decisions. It was about shaping the culture of the team, instilling that same mentality that had made him the best. He could see the potential in the players, but he knew that helping them reach it would take more than just coaching. They needed the kind of leadership that came from experience, from someone who had been in their shoes and had pushed through the challenges to get to the top. Jordan knew that his influence had the power to change lives. But he also understood that it wasn't enough to simply tell people what to do. He had to show them. He had to lead by example, just as he always had. The lessons he learned on the court, lessons of hard work, resilience, and perseverance, were the same lessons that applied off the court. Whether it was in business or in life, success wasn't just about making the right moves, it was about how you responded to adversity, how you continued to push forward when things weren't going your way. The following week saw Jordan diving deeper into his role with the Hornets, meeting with players, coaches, and management to lay out a vision for the future. But as he worked on building the team's success, he also found himself continuing to mentor the younger generation. He spoke to local schools, youth leagues, and even other professional athletes, sharing his wisdom and helping them navigate their own paths. Jordan had long been considered the greatest basketball player of all time, but he was now beginning to realize that his legacy wasn't just about the 6 championships, the MVPs, or the countless records. It was about the impact he had on others, the lessons he could pass on to those who would follow in his footsteps. His legacy, he realized, would continue long after his playing days were over, not just through his business ventures or his ownership of the Hornets, but through the people he had mentored and the lives he had touched. As the months went by, Jordan's influence began to ripple outward. More players sought him out for advice, not just on the game of basketball, but on how to handle the pressures of life, how to balance success with humility, and how to handle failure without letting it define them. He became a pillar of support for many, just as he had been for that teenager at the clinic. And in each of these moments, he realized that his true legacy wasn't just in the records he set, it was in the people he helped along the way. The thought lingered with him as he prepared for the next chapter in his life. Jordan's journey was far from over. His time on the court had been legendary, but his true impact, the one that would last for generations, was just beginning. The lessons he had learned and the wisdom he had gained would live on, not just through his own story, but through the stories of the countless young players who had followed his path. The sun had barely risen when Jordan entered the gym that morning. The routine was something he had maintained since his playing days, though now, it wasn't the pressure of an NBA game that motivated him, it was something deeper, something more about the impact he wanted to have. The gym was quiet, and he took a moment to reflect on how far he'd come. It wasn't just about basketball anymore. It had become about building something sustainable, something lasting, something that could help the next generation of players realize their own potential, just like he had. He'd spent countless hours in these kinds of places, growing up, grinding, learning. Back then, it was all about proving himself, about proving to everyone, including himself, that he belonged in the conversation about greatness. Now, the purpose had shifted. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Instead, his role was about lifting others up, sharing what he had learned with them, showing them that they too could achieve greatness, not just on the court, but in every part of their lives. Jordan sat on the sidelines as the players filtered in, stretching and warming up. It was a new group, a different set of athletes. Some were already familiar with his work through his career, others were still in the early stages of their development. They were hungry, eager to learn, and he knew exactly what they needed. He had seen so many players come and go, some never quite reaching their potential, others falling short because they didn't understand the value of consistency, of the daily grind. They all thought success came quickly, that it was something you could just claim, but Jordan knew that wasn't the reality. It took more than just talent. It took resilience, patience, and the willingness to take hard hits and keep moving forward. The first drill was simple, one Jordan had done 1,000 times himself. He had the group line up and start with basic shooting exercises. As the ball bounced off the rim or missed completely, the sounds of frustration filled the gym. He watched them, noticing the ones who were quickly growing frustrated and the ones who kept trying despite their misses. It was always the same. People who struggled with failure often gave up too soon. They didn't see that failure was an opportunity, not a final verdict. It was an invitation to learn, to push yourself, to do better. Jordan stopped the drill, signaling for the group to gather around. "Let's talk about something," he said. "I know some of you are frustrated right now, but that's exactly where growth happens. Look at every missed shot as a lesson. You don't get better by making every shot. You get better by analyzing why you missed, figuring out what went wrong, and adjusting. This game, like life, is about constant improvement. Nobody wins by doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. You've got to be willing to learn." He saw a few heads nod, but others looked uncertain. It was normal. No one learned that lesson overnight. Jordan wasn't expecting them to suddenly change their mindset. But what he wanted them to understand was that success came from that shift in thinking. It was all about perspective. One of the players, a tall, lanky teenager with a quick first step, raised his hand. "What if I don't think I can get better? What if I'm just not good enough?" Jordan turned to him, giving him a moment to speak. "Let me tell you something. When I was coming up, I didn't think I was good enough either. I got cut from my high school varsity team. Think about that. Michael Jordan, the guy you all know, was once not good enough for his high school team. But here's the thing, I didn't let that define me. I didn't quit because someone else told me I wasn't good enough. I worked harder, I learned from it, and I kept going." He could see the doubt in the kid's eyes slowly start to fade, replaced by something else, hope, maybe, or just the realization that the path to greatness wasn't always linear. It wasn't about getting it right the first time or being naturally gifted. It was about the resilience to keep going when things got tough. It was about learning how to fall and get back up. Jordan went on with the drills, mixing up different exercises to work on shooting, footwork, and defensive positioning. Throughout it all, he kept a close eye on each player, offering advice, encouragement, and sometimes just a word or two that made all the difference. As the session wore on, he saw more confidence in their movements, more determination. They were still missing shots, still fumbling a few passes, but they weren't giving up. That's what mattered. As they wrapped up the session, Jordan gathered them for a final talk. He could see that they were physically exhausted, but mentally they were in a different place now than when they had walked in. They had learned a lesson that was often the hardest to grasp, that failure wasn't something to fear. It was part of the process. "You all showed something today," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his own experiences. "You didn't quit when things got hard. You kept going. And that's what separates the great players from everyone else. It's not just the talent, it's the heart, the desire to improve, the willingness to push through the tough moments. Every time you step on that court, you're getting a little bit better. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you that you're not enough. Because you are. Just keep working." The group sat in silence for a moment, taking it all in. Jordan could see the wheels turning in their heads, the gears of understanding beginning to click into place. He smiled to himself. This was why he did this, not for the recognition, not for the accolades, but for these moments, when he could see the shift in someone's mindset, when they started to believe that they could do what he had done, not because of his talent, but because of their own resilience. The gym began to empty out as the players left, but Jordan stayed behind, sitting on the sideline as he watched them go. He knew that not all of them would make it to the NBA, but that wasn't the point. The point was that they had learned something far more valuable: how to face setbacks, how to keep striving for improvement, and how to never give up, no matter what the world told them. And that, he believed, was the true measure of success. As Jordan left the gym, he thought back to the countless hours he had spent perfecting his game, the sacrifices, the setbacks, the frustrations. Those moments had shaped him into who he was, but they had also shaped the way he saw the world. It wasn't just about the win-loss record. It wasn't about the trophies. It was about how you handled the inevitable challenges life would throw at you. His story wasn't just one of basketball, it was one of resilience, and it was a story he hoped would inspire others to keep pushing, even when it seemed impossible. Walking out into the cool night, Jordan knew that his legacy wasn't just about the 6 championships, the MVPs, or the clutch shots. It was about the countless people he had impacted, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had passed on. And in that, he had found something even more valuable than any trophy: a purpose that went beyond the court, a legacy that would live on long after the final buzzer had sounded. The season had just begun, but for Michael Jordan, the game was no longer the same. He had seen and experienced everything there was to see on the basketball court. He had shattered records, won championships, and cemented his place as one of the greatest athletes the world had ever known. But after stepping away from the game for a second time, after proving to the world that his legacy was more than just about winning basketball games, Jordan found himself at a crossroads. In recent years, Jordan had slowly transitioned from basketball star to businessman and philanthropist, yet there was still something deeply ingrained within him that drew him back to the game. He had started buying into teams, using his wealth and influence to make an impact beyond the court. But that competitive fire, the one that had driven him to break every boundary on the court, had never fully gone out. One morning, as he sipped his coffee in the quiet of his office, Jordan found himself reflecting on what had brought him back to the game time and time again. What was it that made him push through, after everything he had accomplished? Why had he retired, only to come back, again and again, each time with more to lose and yet more to prove? In many ways, he had come to realize that his return to basketball wasn't just about chasing records or proving that he was still the best. It was about something deeper, something much more personal. He was searching for a deeper connection to the game, a purpose that extended beyond the personal accolades, a way to leave a legacy that would transcend the court and inspire future generations. Jordan had always been driven by the desire to win, but as time passed, he realized that there was more to his story than just championships. The world had seen the athlete, the competitor, the one who could not be stopped. But now, as he looked around at the world of basketball, he realized that his journey had evolved beyond what anyone expected. He had learned that the true power of his legacy wasn't in the victories, it was in the moments that made people believe they could do anything. That day, Jordan found himself on a different kind of mission, one that took him back to the roots of the game. He had received a call from an old friend, a coach he had worked with years ago, who asked for his help. The request was simple: come to a local high school game, talk to the players, share your story, and see if you can help them. The coach mentioned that they had a talented group, but the team's mentality needed work. They were struggling to work together, struggling to understand the true meaning of what it took to be a champion, not just on the court but in life. It was something that resonated with Jordan. He knew that championship mentality didn't just come from great players, it came from a strong team, built on trust, hard work, and discipline. That was where he had thrived during his time in the NBA. He wasn't the fastest, the tallest, or the most naturally gifted. What set him apart was his mindset, his ability to push through adversity and make those around him better. If he could instill that same mindset in these young players, maybe they could change the course of their careers and lives. The game that night was packed. It wasn't an NBA game, but the energy in the arena was palpable. Parents, students, and fans filled the stands, eager to watch this team, a group of high school kids who had potential but still didn't know how to harness it. Jordan slipped in quietly, blending into the crowd, his face hidden behind a hoodie. He wasn't here to be the star, he was here to observe, to see how the game was being played and how the team was functioning. The game started, and Jordan immediately noticed the disconnect. The players were talented, no doubt. They had the skills, the handles, the jump shots, the footwork. But there was no chemistry. Players were playing for themselves, not for the team. The ball moved aimlessly, with each player trying to showcase their individual talent rather than running the plays, working together, or finding the open man. It was a stark contrast to the teams Jordan had been a part of, the ones where everyone knew their role, where sacrifices were made for the greater good. Jordan sat in silence, taking it all in. He wasn't here to critique the individual performances, but to understand the bigger picture, the team's mentality. As the game went on, the disconnect became more apparent. The team was losing, not just because they were outplayed, but because they had no sense of unity. The moment they faced any adversity, they crumbled. Jordan could see the frustration mounting on the players' faces. They were looking for someone to blame, someone to point fingers at. At halftime, Jordan was invited to speak to the team. The players sat quietly, awaiting his words. They had all heard the stories of his greatness, his 6 championships, his MVPs, and his countless accolades. But they had no idea what it took to achieve those things, how much effort, sacrifice, and mental toughness had gone into each victory. Jordan stood up in front of the team, his presence commanding attention. The players, wide-eyed, awaited what he had to say. He didn't give a long speech. Instead, he simply asked one question: "Do you want to win?" The team nodded, a few players murmuring in agreement. But Jordan knew they didn't fully understand the question. Winning wasn't just about showing up and hoping things would fall into place. It was about a mindset. It was about embracing the grind, the hard work, and the sacrifices that came with it. Jordan paused for a moment before continuing. Winning isn't about who can score the most points. It's about how you respond to adversity. It's about how you come together as a team, how you support each other, how you pick each other up when you're down. All the greats had teammates who pushed them, who held them accountable. Do you have that here? Or are you all just trying to do it on your own? The team sat in silence. They had never been asked to think about it this way before. Jordan wasn't here to make them feel good or give them a pep talk. He was here to make them understand something they hadn't yet figured out, that success wasn't about individual glory. It was about collective effort, about unity, and about each player doing their part, no matter how small it seemed. The next time you step onto this court, Jordan continued, you're not just playing for yourself. You're playing for your teammates, for your coach, for everyone who's put in the work. If you're not playing for each other, you won't win. And if you don't win together, none of it matters. The message was simple, but it was powerful. Jordan didn't need to go into detail about how to run the perfect play or how to improve their shooting technique. He wasn't there to teach basketball skills, he was there to teach them how to think, how to approach the game with the right mentality. When the second half began, there was a noticeable change. The players started moving the ball more. They began communicating on defense, working together to get open looks. There were still mistakes, there would always be mistakes, but the mentality had shifted. Instead of trying to win individually, they were playing as a team. And it showed. The game ended with a narrow win, but it wasn't the score that mattered. It was the shift in the team's mindset, the way they had started working together. Jordan knew that this was just the beginning for them. They wouldn't suddenly be champions overnight, but they had taken the first step. They had begun to understand what it meant to be a team, and that was the first step toward greatness. As Jordan left the gym that night, he didn't feel the same rush of victory that came from his playing days. Instead, he felt something deeper, a sense of purpose. He had passed on something more valuable than any championship. He had shown a group of young players that the key to success wasn't just talent, it was the ability to come together, to support each other, and to never give up, no matter how tough things got. And in that moment, Jordan realized that the legacy he was building wasn't just about his own story, it was about helping others write theirs. The gym lights flickered off one by one as the final game of the high school basketball season came to a close. The players, sweaty and exhausted, had just finished a game that felt like more than just a win, it felt like a beginning. The team had won, but it was the way they had won that mattered. They had played together. They had played for each other. It wasn't about individual glory anymore. They had become a team, and for the first time, they understood what it meant to truly fight for something bigger than themselves. Jordan stood quietly at the back of the gym, watching the players as they celebrated. The coaches were there too, clapping, shaking hands, proud of the growth they had seen in their team. But it wasn't just the win that made this moment significant, it was the transformation. These kids, who had once been fractured and uncertain, now stood united. They had discovered the power of teamwork, and it was something they would carry with them long after the final whistle blew. Jordan didn't need to say anything. He had already done what he had set out to do. The moment he had stepped into that gym, when he had shared his story with those players, had shifted the course of their season. They weren't just playing for victory anymore, they were playing for each other. A few of the players noticed Jordan standing at the back. One by one, they approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him for the words he had shared with them. The young player, the one Jordan had spoken to about failure, the one who had been struggling to find his place, was the first to approach. He was no longer the quiet, unsure kid from a week ago. There was a confidence in his step now, a surety in the way he carried himself. "Mr. Jordan, thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You really helped me see the game differently. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting better, doing the work, and not giving up. I get it now." Jordan smiled, looking the young player in the eye. "You did the work," he said. "You earned it. But remember, it's always about the next step. Every game, every practice, every challenge. If you keep pushing, you'll get there." The kid nodded, his eyes full of gratitude. It wasn't just about the game anymore, it was about the lessons that would shape his future. Jordan had given him more than basketball advice. He had given him a new way to look at himself, at his potential. And that, for Jordan, was what mattered most. As the gym slowly emptied out and the final game faded into the past, Jordan couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led him to this moment. He had spent so much of his life focused on basketball, on becoming the best player to ever step on the court. But now, standing there, watching this group of young players come together, he realized that his impact didn't have to end with his playing days. The game had given him so much, but now he had the opportunity to give something back. For years, Jordan had been the one to push his teammates to greatness, to drag them along when the pressure was too much, to take the game into his own hands when it counted. But now, he saw the power in creating a team that could push each other. He had always known that basketball wasn't just about individual skill, it was about collective effort. But now, he was seeing it play out in front of him in real time. He could see the way the team had evolved, how they had come together through adversity, how they had fought for each other on the court. As Jordan prepared to leave the gym, he was approached by the coach. The coach, an older man who had been around the game for decades, gave Jordan a firm handshake. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've done more for these kids than I ever could. You've shown them what it really means to be a team." Jordan nodded, humbled. "You've done the hard work, coach. I just gave them a little push. They were ready for it." The coach smiled. "Maybe. But you gave them something they'll carry with them forever. You reminded them that basketball is more than just a game. It's about life. It's about building something that lasts." As Jordan walked out into the night, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about his legacy as a player, it was about the future of the game. These kids weren't just going to remember the lessons he taught them on the court, they were going to carry them into every aspect of their lives. And that was enough. For so long, Jordan had defined himself by his championships, his MVPs, his legendary moments on the court. But now, he realized that the greatest victories weren't the ones that came from scoring the most points or hitting the winning shot. They were the victories that came from helping others rise to their potential, from teaching them that they, too, could overcome adversity, push past their doubts, and achieve greatness. Jordan had spent his life competing against the best players in the world. But now, he was part of something even bigger, helping others become the best version of themselves. He knew he could never stop playing the game in his heart, but in that moment, he understood that this was his new purpose. This was his new mission. As he got into his car and drove off into the night, Jordan looked out at the city he had called home for so many years. The streets, the skyline, the lights, they all looked different now. His story, the one he had lived for so long, had come full circle. He had given the world everything he had on the court, but now he had the chance to leave behind something even more important, a legacy of empowerment, of helping others rise above their own challenges and make a lasting impact in the world. For the first time, Jordan felt content. He had reached the pinnacle of his career, and while he wasn't finished helping others just yet, he knew that this new chapter was just as important as the one that had defined his basketball career. He had spent a lifetime overcoming obstacles, breaking barriers, and proving that greatness was within reach for those who were willing to put in the work. Now, it was his turn to show others that the path to greatness wasn't just about what you achieved, it was about how you helped others along the way. The final buzzer of his playing days had sounded long ago, but Michael Jordan's legacy was far from over. The game had shaped him, but now he would help shape the future of the game, one lesson at a time. And that was more fulfilling than any championship or trophy could ever be.